50 heavily patched Hells Angels, 50 custom Harley-Davidsons lined up outside a roadside dive. Touching a club member's bike is an unspoken death wish. But when the Bakersfield chapter walked out into the sweltering California heat, they didn't find vandals. They found folded white notes tucked into their helmets. Bakersfield, California, mid-July. The kind of dry, suffocating summer heat that melts the tar on the highway and makes the air shimmer with deceitful mirages. The Rusty Nail Saloon sat just off Route 99, a notorious haven for the one-percenters. Inside it was a sanctuary of cheap whiskey, stale cigarette smoke, and the heavy, booming laughter of men who lived entirely by their own violent code. Clayton Hayes pushed open the heavy oak doors of the saloon, squinting as the blinding afternoon sun hit his eyes. At 52, Clayton was the president of the Bakersfield chapter of the Hells Angels. He was a man carved from granite, his skin the canvas of faded ink and jagged scars. Behind him walked his most trusted inner circle, Ricky Maddox, the volatile sergeant-at-arms, and Big Dave Sullivan, the chapter's towering enforcer who tipped the scales of 300 pounds. They were buzzing from a successful run, laughing about a joke Ricky had just cracked. The parking lot was a sea of chrome and custom paint jobs. Thrifty Harley-Davidson motorcycles sat gleaming in the sun. But as Clayton approached his heavily modified road glide, the laughter died in his throat. His heavy engineer boots ground to a halt on the gravel. There, wedged perfectly between his worn leather seat and the visor of his custom-painted helmet, was a crisp white envelope. The silence that fell over the trio was instant and deafening. In the world of outlaw motorcycle clubs, a man's bike is an extension of his soul. You do not look at it too long, you certainly do not sit on it, and you absolutely do not touch it. To leave something on the president's bike was an act of profound suicidal disrespect. Ricky's hand immediately dropped to the heavy brass knuckles resting in his leather cut. His eyes darted around the desolate parking lot, scanning the empty highway and the rusted-out cars across the street. "Who the hell?" Ricky growled, the veins in his thick neck bulging. "Someone's looking to get buried in the desert," Dave muttered, his massive fists clenching. Clayton didn't say a word. His face was an unreadable mask. He reached out, his heavy, silver-ringed fingers pulling the envelope free. It wasn't sealed. There was no name on the front. He half expected it to be a death threat from the Mongols or the Vagos, a declaration of a turf war. He pulled out the single sheet of lined paper. It was handwritten in neat, looping blue cursive. It looked like the handwriting of a school teacher. Clayton read the words, and as he did, the oppressive heat of the California sun seemed to vanish, replaced by an icy, paralyzing dread that shot straight down his spine. The note read, "Clayton, the fire in Fresno, August 12, 1998. I know who really lit the match, and I know why you let your brother Jimmy take the fall. He's been in Cochrane for 25 years for your sin. It's time to pay the toll." The blood drained entirely from Clayton's face. He staggered backward a half-step, his boots scraping against the asphalt. This wasn't a gang threat. This was a ghost story. In 1998, a massive blaze had engulfed a rival clubhouse in Fresno. It was a strategic, brutal move to protect the Hells Angels armory. Clayton had poured the gasoline. Clayton had struck the match, but when the ATF and local police closed in, his younger brother, Jimmy, a fresh prospect at the time, had stepped forward, confessed to the whole thing, and taken a 25-year sentence to protect Clayton and the club. It was the darkest, most agonizing secret of Clayton's life. Only 3 people on Earth knew the truth: Clayton, Jimmy, and the old chapter president who had died of liver failure a decade ago. "Boss?" Ricky asked, his voice losing its aggressive edge, replaced by genuine concern as he watched his president turn pale. "Clayton, what does it say? Is it the feds?" Before Clayton could answer, Dave let out a sharp, breathless gasp. Clayton snapped his head up. Dave was standing by his own bike, a customized panhead. He was staring down at a similar white envelope in his massive hands. "There's one on mine," Dave whispered, his voice trembling, a sound Clayton had never heard from the giant enforcer in 20 years of riding together. Ricky spun around and lunged toward his own bike. Tucked inside the leather tassels of his handlebars was a third envelope. Suddenly, the parking lot felt like a cage. They weren't just being disrespected, they were being hunted. "Read yours," Clayton commanded, his voice tight, hoarse, barely recognizable. He shoved his own note deep into the pocket of his denim cut, unwilling to let his brothers see the shame of his past. Ricky ripped his envelope open, his hands shaking slightly. Ricky was a man who thrived on chaos. He had survived shootouts, prison riots, and high-speed chases without blinking. But as his eyes scanned the neat blue cursive, his tough exterior shattered like cheap glass. Ricky's note read, "Ricky, the $40,000 missing from the Oakland gun run last November. You told the club the California Highway Patrol confiscated it during a traffic stop. You lied. You took it to pay for your mother's oncology bills at Cedars-Sinai. The club doesn't tolerate thieves, Ricky. Even desperate ones. What happens when I tell them?" Ricky's breathing became shallow, rapid. Embezzling from the club was a cardinal sin. It didn't matter if the money went to charity, a dying mother, or the cartel. Stealing from the Hells Angels meant a severe beating, strict patches, and often a quiet disappearance into the Mojave. Ricky looked up at Clayton, absolute terror in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, to lie, to defend himself, but the words wouldn't come. "And you, Dave?" Clayton asked, ignoring Ricky's panic. The foundation of trust that held their brotherhood together was already beginning to fracture. Dave, the 300-pound giant who had once ripped a bar door off its hinges with his bare hands, was crying. Thick, silent tears rolled down his weathered cheeks, getting lost in his graying beard. He stared at the piece of paper as if it were a bomb about to detonate. Dave's note read, "Dave, Chloe is living in Portland now. She didn't stay in Chicago like you thought. She has a son, a little boy named Wyatt. He has your eyes, but she still wakes up screaming when she hears the sound of a motorcycle. You broke her, Dave, but I can tell you exactly where to find her." 20 years ago, Dave had walked out on his wife and his 5-year-old daughter, Chloe, choosing the roar of the highway and the brotherhood of the club over suburban life. It was a decision that had haunted his quiet moments ever since. He had tried to find her a decade later, but she had vanished, changing her name to escape the shadow of her outlaw father. Now, a total stranger was dangling his flesh and blood in front of him. "Who did this?" Dave choked out, his massive hands crumpling the paper. "Who the hell is doing this?" "I don't know," Clayton said, his mind racing, piecing the fragments together. "But this isn't random. They didn't hit the prospects' bikes. They didn't hit the regulars. They hit the inner circle. They know our books. They know our families. They know our pasts." Clayton's eyes narrowed. The panic was fading, slowly being replaced by a cold, calculating rage. He was the president. He had to lead. "Terry!" Clayton roared, turning on his heel and storming back toward the rusty nail. Ricky and Dave followed, the gravel crunching violently beneath their boots. They kicked the saloon doors open, startling the few day drinkers at the bar. Terry, the middle-aged bartender who allowed the club to use the back room, looked up, freezing as he saw the murderous expressions on the three men's faces. "The cameras," Clayton demanded, leaning over the sticky mahogany bar. "Back office. Now." Terry didn't ask questions. He dropped his rag and scurried toward the dimly lit office in the back, fumbling with his keys. The three angels crowded into the tiny, airless room, the smell of stale beer and old paperwork suffocating them. Terry pulled up the CCTV footage on a dusty, square monitor. The camera pointed directly at the parking lot. "Roll it back," Clayton ordered. 10 minutes. The screen flickered. 10 minutes ago, the parking lot was empty. "Keep going," Ricky snapped. 15 minutes. 20. Then, at exactly 20:14 p.m., a figure strolled into the frame. The three bikers leaned in closer, their breath fogging the glass of the monitor. They expected to see a rival biker in full colors, or maybe an undercover Fed in a cheap suit. Instead, they saw an old man. He was average height, slight of build, probably in his late 60s or early 70s. He was wearing faded blue jeans, scuffed brown boots, and a distinctive olive-green military field jacket. A worn baseball cap was pulled low over his eyes. The old man didn't sneak. He didn't look over his shoulder. He walked with a slow, deliberate, almost arrogant confidence right into the middle of the Hells Angels bikes. He paused at Clayton's road glide, casually reaching into his pocket, pulling out an envelope and sliding it into the helmet. He repeated the process for Ricky and Dave's bikes, moving with the practiced precision of a man who had done this 1,000 times. "Zoom in," Dave demanded, squinting at the screen. "Get a look at his face." Terry fumbled with the mouse, digitally zooming the grainy footage. The pixels blurred, then sharpened just enough. As the old man finished placing the final note, he stopped. He turned slowly, deliberately, and looked directly up at the security camera. It was as if he knew exactly where the blind spots were, and chose to ignore them. He reached up, tipped his baseball cap to the lens, and smiled. It was a chilling, knowing smile. "Wait," Ricky said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He pointed a trembling, calloused finger at the screen. "Look at the shoulder of that green jacket. And look at his lapel." Clayton squinted. On the shoulder of the faded field jacket was a distinct patch. The screaming eagle of the 101st Airborne Division, and pinned to the collar, glinting in the California sun, was a tiny, unmistakable piece of silver jewelry. A custom-made lapel pin shaped like a broken motorcycle wheel. Clayton's breath hitched in his throat. The room started to spin. The oppressive heat of the back office suddenly felt like a walk-in freezer. He knew that jacket. He knew that broken wheel pin. He was the one who had custom-ordered it. "Boss," Ricky asked, noticing the absolute terror gripping Clayton. "Do you know him?" "That's impossible," Clayton whispered, stumbling back until he hit the cheap filing cabinet behind him. That can't be." "Who is it, Clayton?" Dave barked, his patience shattered. Clayton pointed a shaking finger at the smiling face on the frozen screen. "That's Arthur Pendleton," Clayton said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "The founder of the Reno chapter. But that's impossible, because I put a bullet in the back of his head and buried him in the Nevada desert 5 years ago." The silence in the cramped back office of the Rusty Nail was suffocating. The stale smell of spilled beer and cheap cigars was suddenly overpowered by the metallic tang of pure, unadulterated fear. Clayton Hayes, a man who had commanded respect through sheer intimidation for over 2 decades, looked like he had just been gutted. "Arthur Pendleton," Ricky whispered, the name hanging in the air like a curse. He stepped away from the monitor, staring at his president with a mixture of horror and sudden, violent suspicion. "You told the club Arthur went to Mexico. You said he took a buyout and retired to Baja." Clayton swallowed hard, his throat clicking in the quiet room. "He was selling our supply routes to the feds, Ricky. He was a rat. I did what I had to do to protect the charter. I took him out to the salt flats, put a .45 in the back of his skull, and buried him." "Clearly you didn't dig deep enough," Dave rumbled. The giant enforcer wasn't looking at the screen anymore. He was staring at his own trembling hands, his mind thousands of miles away in Portland, with a daughter he had abandoned and a grandson he had never met. "A dead man doesn't walk into our parking lot, Clayton. A dead man doesn't know about Chloe. And he sure as hell doesn't know about Ricky's mom." "It's a setup," Clayton growled, his survival instincts finally clawing their way through the panic. "Someone is wearing his jacket. Someone found his pin. It's a psychological game. Did you look at the face on that screen?" Ricky shouted, his voice cracking, slamming his heavy, silver-ringed fist onto the filing cabinet. "That is Arthur. Older, grayer, but it's him. And he knows about the 40 grand I took. If the national chapter finds out I stole cartel money to pay for chemotherapy, they won't just kill me, Clayton. They'll butcher my mother, too." Ricky's chest heaved. The unbreakable brotherhood of the Hells Angels was fracturing before Clayton's eyes. In the criminal underworld, trust is the only currency that matters, and in the span of 20 minutes, Arthur Pendleton had bankrupted them all. Clayton reached into his denim cut and pulled out his own crumpled envelope. He smoothed the paper out on the desk with shaking fingers. He flipped the note over. There, written in the same neat, blue cursive, was a single line of text he hadn't noticed before. Midnight. The old airstrip at Black Rock. Come alone, or the secrets go to the national president at dawn. Black Rock, Clayton muttered. It was an abandoned World War II-era dirt runway just over the Nevada border. A desolate, god-forsaken stretch of desert where the club used to test illegal weapon modifications. "He wants us out there," Dave said, his voice terrifyingly flat. "He's calling us out. We go heavily armed," Ricky said, his eyes darting wildly. "We take the whole chapter. We surround the place." "No," Clayton interrupted, his voice finally regaining its authoritative gravel. "The note says, come alone. If we roll up with 50 patched members, he pushes a button, and our lives are over. I go to prison for the rest of my life. Ricky, you and your mother get hunted down by the cartel. And Dave, you'll never see your daughter." Dave closed his eyes, a pained grimace twisting his scarred face. "So what's the play, boss?" "We ride," Clayton said, pulling his heavy leather jacket over his shoulders. "Just the three of us. We find out how he survived, we find out who he's working with, and we finish the job I started 5 years ago." The ride from Bakersfield to the Nevada border was a grueling 4-hour journey into darkness. By the time the sun dipped below the jagged horizon, the sweltering heat of the day was entirely devoured by the freezing, biting cold of the Mojave Desert. Usually, riding in formation was a spiritual experience for the Angels, a roaring, unified symphony of chrome and horsepower. Tonight, it was a funeral procession. Clayton led the pack, his mind racing through the horrific arithmetic of the night. How did Arthur survive a point-blank gunshot? How did he compile this blackmail? The secrets were too disparate, too isolated. Ricky's theft was a desperate hidden act of a son trying to save his mother. Dave's daughter changing her name was buried under miles of red tape, and Jimmy taking the fall for the arson. That was a secret buried beneath 25 years of prison concrete. At exactly midnight, the 3 headlights cut through the pitch-black desert, illuminating the cracked, weed-choked asphalt of the Black Rock airstrip. There were no lights, no buildings. Well, just an endless sea of sagebrush and sand. They parked their bikes, the massive engines ticking and pinging as they cooled in the freezing air. The silence of the desert was absolute. Then a sudden, blinding floodlight snapped on 100 yards down the runway. The 3 bikers shielded their eyes, instinctively reaching for the heavy firearms tucked beneath their leather cuts. Silhouetted against the harsh white light was a single folding table, 2 metal lawn chairs, and the figure of an old man sitting perfectly still, drinking from a thermos. "Stay sharp," Clayton whispered, racking the slide of his 1911 pistol. "If he twitches, you light him up." They walked down the runway, their boots crunching loudly against the gravel. As they approached the light, the silhouette resolved into sharp, undeniable reality. It was Arthur Pendleton. He was wearing the same green 101st Airborne jacket from the security footage. The broken wheel lapel pin glinted in the floodlight. But what stopped Clayton dead in his tracks was the horrifying, jagged scar that carved its way up the right side of Arthur's neck, disappearing behind his ear, the permanent, gruesome signature of a .45 caliber hollow point bullet. Arthur took a slow sip from the plastic cup of his thermos. He didn't look at the guns pointed at him. He looked directly into Clayton's eyes and smiled. "You always were a sloppy mechanic, Clayton," Arthur said. His voice was raspy, destroyed by nerve damage, sounding like gravel grinding against rusted iron. "You didn't check for a pulse. You just kicked dirt over my face and rode away to steal my charter. You're a dead man," Clayton growled, leveling the pistol directly at Arthur's chest. "I've been for 5 years," Arthur replied calmly. He reached out and tapped a thick manila envelope resting on the folding table. "But tonight I'm the Reaper. Put the guns away, boys. You kill me and an encrypted email sends everything in this envelope to the national president, the feds, and the Sonora cartel. You'll be hunted like dogs by tomorrow afternoon." Ricky's hands shook. He slowly lowered his weapon. Dave didn't even have his gun drawn. His eyes were glued to the manila envelope. "Sit down, Clayton," Arthur commanded. "We have club business to discuss." Clayton slowly lowered his 1911, though he didn't holster it. He stepped forward and sank into the metal lawn chair opposite Arthur. Up close, Arthur looked ancient, his face weathered into deep canyons by the brutal desert sun and years of solitary recovery. "What do you want, Arthur?" Clayton demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous baritone. "Money. Your old seat at the table. You want the Reno charter back." Arthur laughed, a dry, hacking sound that ended in a cough. "I don't want a seat at a table of liars and thieves. I spent 5 years learning to walk again, 5 years in the shadows watching you parade around as a king. I don't want your money, Clayton. I want your empire turned to ash." Arthur slid 3 smaller envelopes across the table. They were identical to the ones left on their motorcycles. Inside those are the exact times, dates, and bank routing numbers of Ricky's embezzlement, Arthur said methodically. There are photographs of Dave's daughter and grandson, along with her home address in Portland. And there is a signed, notarized affidavit detailing exactly how you poured the gasoline at the Fresno clubhouse in '98, while your brother Jimmy burned his life down for you. "How?" Dave interrupted, stepping into the harsh light, his voice trembling with raw, unfiltered desperation. "How do you know about Chloe? I paid private investigators 10 grand apiece, and they couldn't find her." "How did you do it?" Arthur tilted his head, a look of genuine pity flashing in his eyes. "I didn't find her, Dave. I didn't find the missing cartel money either. I'm just an old ghost. I don't have the resources to dig up your sins." Clayton felt the cold desert air pierce straight through his leather jacket, freezing his blood. "Then who gave you the information?" Arthur leaned forward, folding his scarred hands on the table. "Someone who had 25 years to sit in a 6x8 concrete cell and realize that his older brother was never going to come save him. Someone who realized that the Brotherhood he sacrificed his freedom for was nothing but a lie." Clayton stopped breathing. The pistol in his hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Jimmy," Clayton whispered. "Jimmy?" Arthur confirmed, nodding slowly. "Your brother is a smart kid, Clayton." "Well, a smart man now. Over the years, the guards at Corcoran State Prison grew to like him. They let him use the computers. They let him make untracked calls. He became the spider in the center of the web. He heard the whispers about Ricky's mother. He tracked down Dave's daughter through public birth records online. And when he had enough ammunition to blow the Bakersfield chapter off the map, he reached out to the one man he knew hated you as much as he did." "No," Clayton stammered, shaking his head, a profound, agonizing betrayal tearing through his chest. "Jimmy wouldn't do that. He took the fall for me. He loves the club." "He loved you," Arthur corrected sharply. "Until you stopped visiting. Until you stopped paying his commissary. Until you became president and decided that appealing his case was a bad look for the club's new legitimate businesses. You abandoned him in a cage, Clayton. So, he built a bomb, and he asked me to deliver it." Arthur tapped the thick manila envelope one last time. "Here is the deal," Arthur said, his voice turning to ice. "At sunrise, you 3 are going to ride back to Bakersfield. Dave, you are going to pack your bags, take your cut off, and ride to Portland. You're going to knock on your daughter's door and beg for her forgiveness. You are done with this life." Dave let out a shuddering breath, staring at the dirt. He didn't argue. He just nodded. "Ricky," Arthur continued, turning his gaze to the sergeant-at-arms, "you are going to take your mother, put her in a car, and drive until you hit the Canadian border. You leave the club behind. If you ever wear the Death's Head patch again, the cartel gets your routing numbers." Ricky swallowed hard, the tough, volatile biker completely broken by the reality of his situation. "And what about him?" Ricky asked, pointing a trembling finger at Clayton. Arthur's eyes locked onto Clayton, burning with a lifetime of vengeance. "Clayton is going to ride to the local FBI field office in Fresno," Arthur said softly. "He is going to walk through the front doors, surrender his weapon, and sign a full, detailed confession regarding the 1998 arson. He is going to exonerate Jimmy, and he is going to spend the rest of his natural, miserable life in the exact same cell his brother has been rotting in." "I'll die in there," Clayton whispered, the reality of a president entering a maximum security prison crashing down on him. "Yes," Arthur agreed, "you will. But if you don't walk into that precinct by 9 a.m. tomorrow, this envelope goes out, and Jimmy ensures that everyone in the yard knows exactly what you did to your own flesh and blood. You won't last 48 hours. The silence returned to the desert, heavier and more suffocating than before. The wind howled across the cracked runway, kicking up dust around the boots of the three men. They had come to the Mojave Desert expecting a shootout. They had come expecting a war. But there was no war to fight. They hadn't been defeated by a rival gang or a federal task force. They'd been dismantled by the very sins they thought they had buried. Arthur stood up slowly, painfully, his bad leg dragging slightly as he stepped away from the table. He zipped up his green military jacket and pulled his baseball cap low over his eyes. "The sun comes up in 5 hours, gentlemen," Arthur said, turning his back on them and walking into the darkness beyond the floodlight. "I'd suggest you spend them saying your goodbyes." Clayton, Ricky, and Dave stood frozen in the harsh white light. No one spoke. No one reached for their guns. Slowly, with tears in his eyes, Dave reached up, unzipped his heavy leather, cut the symbol of his entire life, and let it fall into the Nevada dirt. The Hells Angels of Bakersfield hadn't been destroyed by a ghost. They had been destroyed by the truth. And as Clayton looked down at his discarded patch in the dirt, he realized that hell wasn't a place you went when you died. It was the place you built for yourself while you were still alive. The darkest secrets never stay buried, and true betrayal always comes from the inside. When the dust settled in the Mojave, three men realized their unstoppable brotherhood was nothing but a fragile house of cards. If this intense true story had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more unbelievable real-life drama.